Thousands of kilometers from the capitals he once controlled, a solitary prisoner stared across the South Atlantic Ocean. His empire had vanished. His armies were scattered. His crown was gone. Yet even in exile, kings feared him. How could a man born on a small Mediterranean island rise to dominate much of Europe before the age of 40? How did a young artillery officer from a recently conquered territory force emperors, monarchs, and centuries-old dynasties to bend before his ambition? And why, more than 200 years later, do military academies, political scientists, and historians still study his every campaign? His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. To some, he was a visionary who modernized governments and reshaped legal systems. To others, he was an insatiable conqueror whose wars caused immense suffering across the continent. Between these competing portraits lies one of history's most extraordinary stories, a tale of revolution, genius, ambition, and the dangerous belief that one individual could remake an entire civilization. But before Napoleon crowned himself emperor beneath the vaulted ceilings of Paris, Europe itself had to be transformed into a place where such a man could rise. In the mid-18th century, Europe was dominated by hereditary monarchies. Power flowed through royal bloodlines, aristocratic privilege, and ancient traditions. Social mobility was limited, and birth often mattered more than talent. France stood among the continent's wealthiest and most influential kingdoms, yet beneath its grandeur lay severe contradictions. The monarchy struggled with mounting debt, worsened by costly wars and financial mismanagement. Tax burdens fell unevenly, while economic hardship deepened among ordinary citizens. Enlightenment thinkers challenged long-held assumptions about authority, justice, and the rights of individuals, creating intellectual currents that questioned the very foundations of absolute monarchy. By the late 1780s, tensions erupted into the French Revolution. Long-established institutions collapsed with astonishing speed. The monarchy was overthrown, noble privileges were dismantled, and revolutionary governments sought to redefine citizenship and sovereignty. Political upheaval soon gave way to instability, internal conflict, and war with neighboring powers determined to contain revolutionary ideas. This environment produced an unprecedented opportunity. Traditional hierarchies weakened, allowing military promotion based increasingly on competence rather than noble birth. For ambitious officers with exceptional ability, the revolution opened doors that had once been firmly closed. One such officer was growing up far from Paris. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769 in Ajaccio on the island of Corsica, only months after the territory came under French control. His family belonged to the local minor nobility, possessing status but limited wealth. Their circumstances provided education and opportunity without guaranteeing influence or comfort. Corsica itself shaped Napoleon's outlook. The island retained a strong regional identity and memories of resistance against foreign domination. Political tensions and competing loyalties surrounded his childhood, exposing him early to questions of power, nationalism, and leadership. As a young boy, Napoleon displayed determination and intellectual curiosity rather than effortless charm. He reportedly preferred books to social gatherings and often immersed himself in history, mathematics, and accounts of famous commanders. Stories of ancient Rome, legendary generals, and ambitious empire builders captured his imagination. Recognizing his academic potential, his family secured admission to military schools in mainland France. The transition was not easy. Speaking with a Corsican accent and coming from outside elite French society, he encountered prejudice and isolation. Yet those experiences reinforced habits of discipline and self-reliance. Instead of seeking popularity, he focused intensely on study. Unlike cavalry officers who often relied on aristocratic prestige or inherited wealth, artillery demanded technical precision. Mathematics, engineering, logistics, and disciplined planning determined success. Napoleon excelled in these demanding subjects. After completing his education, he entered military service as a junior artillery officer. His early career coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in French history. Governments rose and fell rapidly, political factions competed violently, and foreign coalitions threatened the revolutionary state from every direction. Many experienced commanders emigrated, resigned, or were removed from service, creating vacancies for younger officers willing to demonstrate initiative. Napoleon seized every opportunity. Observers noted his remarkable ability to absorb terrain, calculate movement, and position artillery for maximum effect. He studied campaigns relentlessly and developed confidence in making rapid decisions under pressure. Even before achieving fame, colleagues recognized an unusual combination of analytical thinking and bold execution. The stage was set for the moment that would introduce him to the nation. In 1793, the southern port city of Toulon became the center of a major crisis. Royalist forces had surrendered the harbor to Britain and its allies, threatening the French Republic's strategic position in the Mediterranean. A young artillery officer proposed concentrating firepower on key defensive positions rather than dispersing resources. The plan sought to force enemy ships from the harbor by controlling critical high ground. The strategy succeeded. The recapture of Toulon dramatically raised Napoleon's profile within the French military establishment. His performance earned promotion and demonstrated qualities that would define his career: careful preparation, innovative deployment of artillery, and willingness to act decisively when opportunities emerged. For the first time, influential leaders began viewing him not merely as a competent officer, but as a commander capable of altering the course of campaigns. Yet France remained politically unstable, and Napoleon's fortunes would continue to rise through a mixture of talent, circumstance, and relentless ambition. Only 2 years later, in 1795, revolutionary authorities in Paris confronted an armed uprising that threatened to overthrow the government. Napoleon received responsibility for organizing the city's defense. Using artillery with ruthless efficiency, he dispersed attacking forces before they could seize control. The confrontation was brief but decisive, establishing his reputation as a commander willing to make difficult decisions in moments of crisis. The victory earned political trust and expanded responsibilities. More importantly, it brought him to the attention of national leaders searching for military figures capable of defending the fragile republic. Soon afterwards, Napoleon received command of the Army of Italy, a force that many considered poorly supplied and strategically secondary. Few realized that this appointment would transform European history. When Napoleon assumed command in 1796, his army faced shortages of equipment, food, and morale. Many troops doubted their prospects against experienced opponents. Rather than accepting these limitations, he restructured operations around speed, concentration of force, and psychological momentum. He moved rapidly between enemy armies, defeating them separately before they could unite. Smaller French forces repeatedly overcame numerically stronger opponents through superior coordination and timing. Victories in northern Italy stunned European observers and elevated Napoleon from promising officer to international celebrity. His battlefield successes also strengthened France's political position and generated valuable resources for the Republic. Perhaps equally important, they created an image carefully cultivated by Napoleon himself, that of an unstoppable commander whose confidence inspired loyalty and whose victories seemed inevitable. By the end of the campaign, Europe had discovered a new military phenomenon. But for Napoleon, battlefield glory alone would never be enough. He sought something greater than command. He sought power. Fresh from his victories in Italy, Napoleon sought an even grander stage. In 1798, he led an expedition to Egypt with dual objectives: to weaken British trade routes to India and expand French influence beyond Europe. The campaign was unusual because it included not only soldiers but also scholars, engineers, artists, mathematicians, and naturalists. Their research documented Egypt's history, geography, flora, fauna, and architecture, contributing to a wave of European interest in ancient Egyptian civilization. Among the discoveries associated with the expedition was the Rosetta Stone, whose inscriptions later played a crucial role in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. Militarily, the expedition produced mixed results. Napoleon won the Battle of the Pyramids through disciplined formations and tactical planning, but the destruction of much of the French fleet by the British at the Battle of the Nile severely limited French strategic options. Realizing that political conditions in France offered a greater opportunity, Napoleon returned to Europe, leaving his remaining forces behind. By 1799, France was weary of instability, economic uncertainty, and repeated political crises. Governments changed rapidly, public confidence declined, and many citizens longed for order. Napoleon recognized the moment. Working with influential political allies, he participated in the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the existing governing structure and establishing the consulate. Although presented as a constitutional reform, power increasingly concentrated in Napoleon's hands. Within a few years, he became first consul for life, and in 1804 crowned himself Emperor of the French, in a ceremony that symbolized both continuity and rupture with Europe's monarchical traditions. The gesture sent a powerful message. His authority would not be granted by hereditary rulers but claimed through his own achievements and political legitimacy. Napoleon's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Many of his most enduring contributions emerged through administration rather than conquest. He reorganized taxation, strengthened state finances, improved bureaucratic efficiency, expanded infrastructure projects, and promoted merit-based advancement within parts of the civil service and military. Perhaps his most famous domestic achievement was the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal framework that emphasized equality before the law, protection of private property, secular civil administration, and standardized legal procedures. Although not perfect by modern standards and containing limitations in areas such as women's legal rights, the code influenced legal systems across Europe and beyond. Educational institutions were reorganized to train administrators and military officers, while the Bank of France helped stabilize financial administration. Public works, roads, and centralized governance reinforced state capacity. These reforms outlived Napoleon's empire and remain among the strongest reasons historians continue to study his government. Between 1805 and 1809, Napoleon reached the height of his military power. At Austerlitz in 1805, often described as one of history's finest tactical victories, his forces defeated larger Allied armies through deception, timing, and exploitation of terrain. Subsequent campaigns against Prussia and Austria further expanded French influence across continental Europe. By the early 19th century, Napoleon directly controlled or dominated vast territories through annexation, alliances, satellite kingdoms, and dependent states. Family members and trusted associates occupied thrones across the continent, creating a political order centered on French power. Yet maintaining such an extensive system required constant military success, economic resources, and political loyalty, conditions that became increasingly difficult to sustain. Victory came at an enormous human and financial cost. Years of campaigning demanded repeated mobilization of soldiers and strained economies throughout Europe. Communities lost generations of young men to prolonged conflict. Trade disruptions, blockades, and shifting alliances affected merchants and ordinary families far from the front lines. Napoleon's continental system sought to weaken Britain economically by restricting trade with the island nation. Enforcement proved difficult, encouraged smuggling, and generated resentment among allies whose own economies suffered under the restrictions. Increasingly, the empire depended not only on military brilliance but also on political compliance across diverse regions with distinct languages, traditions, and interests. The cracks were beginning to show. In 1812, Napoleon launched one of the largest military operations Europe had ever seen, leading the Grande Armée into the Russian Empire. The campaign began on an extraordinary scale but encountered profound logistical challenges. Russian forces frequently withdrew rather than offering a decisive battle, destroying supplies and infrastructure as they retreated. This strategy denied Napoleon the quick victory he expected. After entering Moscow, French forces found much of the city abandoned and heavily damaged by fires. Without sufficient provisions or a negotiated settlement, remaining in the city became untenable. The retreat proved catastrophic. Harsh weather, disease, hunger, exhaustion, attacks by Russian forces, and the sheer difficulty of maintaining such a massive army over vast distances inflicted devastating losses. Only a fraction of the original invading force returned in organized condition. The Russian campaign fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe. Recognizing French weakness after the Russian disaster, rival powers formed new coalitions. Major defeats followed, culminating in Napoleon's abdication in 1814. He was exiled to the island of Elba, where many assumed his political career had ended forever. They were mistaken. In one of history's most dramatic returns, Napoleon escaped Elba in 1815 and marched through France. Soldiers sent to arrest him instead joined his cause, leading to the period known as the 100 Days. European governments responded rapidly, assembling another coalition determined to prevent his restoration. The decisive confrontation came near the Belgian village of Waterloo. There, after fierce fighting and the timely arrival of Allied reinforcements, Napoleon suffered defeat at the hands of coalition armies commanded by the Duke of Wellington and Field Marshal Blücher. His second abdication followed soon after. This time there would be no return. Rather than risk another escape, Britain transported Napoleon to the remote island of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean. Isolated from continental politics, he spent his remaining years under supervision while reflecting on his career, discussing history with companions, and shaping the narrative through which future generations might remember him. He died there in 1821 at the age of 51. The exact medical details surrounding his death have long been discussed by historians and physicians, but the prevailing scholarly consensus attributes it primarily to illness rather than elaborate conspiracy theories. Few historical figures inspire such sharply divided assessments. Critics emphasize the immense casualties of the Napoleonic Wars, authoritarian tendencies, censorship, and relentless military expansion that engulfed Europe in years of conflict. Supporters point to administrative modernization, legal reform, institutional efficiency, meritocratic advancement in certain sectors, and the enduring influence of the Napoleonic Code on legal systems worldwide. Military academies continue to analyze his campaigns for lessons in operational maneuver, concentration of force, logistics, leadership, and decision-making under uncertainty. Political historians study his transformation of revolutionary ideals into centralized state authority. Legal scholars examine reforms that extended far beyond his lifetime. Even nations that fought against him were changed by the challenges he posed. His story became a catalyst for nationalism, state-building, and constitutional change across Europe. Power often promises permanence, but history rarely grants it. Napoleon Bonaparte began life on a recently annexed island, rose through merit and opportunity during revolutionary upheaval, conquered much of continental Europe, crowned himself emperor, and then lost nearly everything through a combination of ambition, resistance, and strategic overreach. Yet defeat did not erase his influence. The borders he altered, the governments he transformed, the legal principles he promoted, and the debates he inspired continue to shape scholarship and public life more than 2 centuries later. His career remains one of history's most striking demonstrations of both human potential and human limitation. The same determination that elevated him above kings also led him into decisions that his empire could not survive. And perhaps that is the enduring lesson of Napoleon Bonaparte. History remembers not only those who achieve greatness, but also how they choose to wield it.